Rome. The year is 1500. The city is a sprawling maze of ancient ruins and new ambitions. It is a place of immense power and honestly hidden dangers. Into this chaotic world rides a man destined to carve his name into history. His name is Cesare Borgia. He is the son of the Pope Alexander VI. This connection gives him immense influence, but, it is his own ruthless will that truly defines him. He has been appointed Captain General of the Papal armies. This is no mere title, it is a declaration of intent. Cesare has come to Rome not just to serve the church, but to master the city, and through it the entire Italian peninsula. He is a man of action, a man of war, a man ready to do whatever it takes to achieve his goals. Cesare's entrance into Rome is a spectacle of organized might. He doesn't creep into the city, he marches. At the head of his loyal and disciplined soldiers, he presents an image of absolute control. The people of Rome, accustomed to the bickering of noble families and the constant threat of street violence, watch with a mixture of fear and awe. Here is a leader who promises order, but they sense correctly that this order will come at a high price. Cesare's eyes scan the rooftops and the alleyways. He sees not just a city, but a chessboard. Every street, every building, every citizen is a piece to be moved and controlled in his grand game for power. His ambition is a fire that burns brightly, casting long dark shadows over the eternal city. The papal army under Cesare's command is unlike anything Rome has seen for centuries. It is not a collection of mercenaries fighting for the highest bidder. It is a professional fighting force, loyal to him and him alone. He has trained them, equipped them, and instilled in them a sense of purpose. Their purpose is his purpose, to bring Rome to heel. The clatter of their armor on the cobblestone streets is a new sound, a sound of discipline and impending change. Cesare knows that to control Italy, he must first have an unshakable grip on its heart. Rome is that heart, and he is the surgeon, ready to cut out any resistance or dissent that threatens his authority. Upon his arrival, Cesare immediately begins to assess the city's weaknesses. He understands that power is not just about armies. It is about presence. It is about making the people feel your authority in their daily lives. He is not a distant ruler, hidden away in a palace. He is a visible force, riding through the streets, his gaze missing nothing. He is both the law and the enforcer. His father, the Pope, may rule the spiritual lives of Christendom from the Vatican, but Cesare intends to be the undisputed master of the physical world. Starting with the very ground beneath the Holy See, the stage is set, the players are in position, Cesare Borgia's ruthless reign has begun. Cesare Borgia knew that an army could conquer a city, but it could not hold it alone. To maintain control, he needed eyes and ears everywhere. He needed symbols of his power that would loom over the populace, a constant reminder of who was in charge. His solution was ingenious and intimidating: the Borgia Towers. These were not just watchtowers, they were nerve centers of control, strategically placed throughout Rome's many districts. Each tower was a fortress in miniature, garrisoned by a contingent of his most loyal soldiers. From these high perches, his troops could watch the comings and goings of the citizens, monitor trade, and suppress any signs of unrest before they could grow into a rebellion. At the heart of each tower's district was a Borgia captain. These men were handpicked by Cesare for their loyalty and their ruthlessness. They were his lieutenants, his regional governors, and his enforcers. Each captain was responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and stamping out any opposition within their designated territory. They answered to no one but Cesare. This created a clear and brutal chain of command. If a problem arose in a district, the captain was expected to solve it swiftly and without mercy. This system effectively carved Rome into a series of military zones, each one tightly controlled by a man whose own survival depended on his ability to enforce Cesare's will. The towers fundamentally changed the lives of ordinary Romans. Before, the city was a chaotic mix of neighborhoods, each with its own local customs and allegiances. Now everyone lived under the shadow of a Borgia tower. Their presence was oppressive. Soldiers patrolled the streets with newfound arrogance. Commerce was disrupted as captains imposed new taxes and regulations to fund Cesare's war machine. The towers became symbols of subjugation. To defy the captain was to defy Cesare himself, a choice that really few dared to make. The network of towers and captains was a web, and Cesare Borgia was the spider at its center, feeling every vibration, every tremor of dissent across the city. This system was brutally effective. While it bred resentment, it also created a semblance of order where there had been none. The petty squabbles of rival families were silenced. Street crime, at least the kind not sanctioned by the Borgia, was reduced. Cesare presented this as progress, as the firm hand of a leader bringing stability. But honestly, it was the stability of a prison yard. The towers were a physical manifestation of his philosophy. Power grows from control, and control is achieved through constant surveillance and the ever-present threat of force. Rome was becoming a well-oiled machine, but its citizens were merely cogs, their freedom sacrificed for the sake of Cesare's grand ambition. Cesare Borgia's ambitions stretched far beyond the ancient walls of Rome. Controlling the city was merely the first necessary step in a much grander plan. His ultimate goal, the dream that drove his every action, was the unification of Italy. For centuries, the Italian peninsula had been a fractured land. It was a patchwork of warring city-states, papal territories and kingdoms influenced by foreign powers like France and Spain. Venice, Florence, Naples, Milan, they were all rivals, constantly vying for dominance. Cesare saw this division as a source of weakness. He envisioned a new Italy, a single powerful kingdom forged in the fires of conquest and united under one ruler, himself. This was a radical idea for its time. The concept of a unified Italian nation did not truly exist in the minds of the people. Loyalty was local, given to one's city or one's lord, not to a nebulous concept of Italy. Cesare, however, was a student of history. He looked back to the glory of the Roman Empire and saw a model for the future. He believed that only a single strong leader could end the incessant warfare that plagued the peninsula and drive out the foreign armies that treated Italy as their personal battlefield. His campaign was therefore framed as a war of liberation, even as it was a war of conquest. He was the Italian prince who would save Italy from itself. To achieve this monumental task, Cesare used the resources of the papacy. The papal army, which he had modernized and disciplined, became the instrument of his ambition. With Rome secured as his base of operations, he began a series of brilliant and brutal military campaigns. He moved against the tyrannical lords of the Romagna region, one by one. Cities like Imola, Forli, and Faenza fell before the might of his army and the cunning of his strategies. He was a master of siege warfare, of deception, and of swift, decisive action. With each victory, his territory expanded, and his dream of a united kingdom moved one step closer to reality. Cesare's methods were ruthless, but they were undeniably effective. He made examples of those who resisted him, ensuring that other cities would think twice before defying his advance. Yet in some of the lands he conquered, he was seen as a better alternative to the petty despots he had overthrown. He brought a more centralized and often more efficient administration. His message was clear: submit to the authority of the Borgia, and you will have order and stability. Resist, and you will be crushed. This was the foundation of his kingdom building. It was a project paid for with blood and iron, all justified in the name of a glorious united Italy. Cesare Borgia understood that true, lasting power was built on more than just military might. It required a unifying ideology, a common belief that bound the people together under his rule. For Cesare and his father, Pope Alexander VI, that ideology was Catholicism. Their vision for a united Italy was inextricably linked to the vision of a united Christendom, with Rome at its absolute center. In Cesare's new kingdom, there would be no room for religious dissent. All citizens would adhere to the one true faith, and the church, led by his family, would be the ultimate spiritual authority. This policy was not just about piety, it was about control. To enforce this vision, Cesare began a systematic campaign to assert the dominance of the Catholic Church throughout the territories he controlled. This meant not only promoting its teachings, but actively suppressing any and all other forms of worship. Ancient places of worship, remnants of older faiths or fledgling chapels of dissenting Christian sects, were targeted. Under Cesare's orders, his soldiers were tasked with dismantling and destroying these sites. This was an act of profound symbolism. It was a clear message that the old ways were over. The new era, the Borgia era, would have only one God and one church. This policy of religious purification was carried out with the same ruthless efficiency as his military campaigns. Historical sites that had been tolerated for centuries were suddenly declared heretical and torn down. Communities that had worshipped in their own way for generations were forced to convert or flee. This created a climate of fear and suspicion. Neighbors watched neighbors, and any deviation from Orthodox Catholic practice could be reported to the authorities. Cesare's captains were given the power to enforce religious conformity in their districts, making it another tool in their arsenal of control. The destruction of these sacred places was a physical and spiritual erasure of any identity that was not Borgia approved. For Cesare, this was a necessary part of nation building. A state with multiple faiths was, in his eyes, a state with multiple loyalties. He could not afford such division. By making Catholicism the exclusive and mandatory religion, he was attempting to create a single cultural identity for his new kingdom. The cross and the sword became intertwined. The papal army marched not just for conquest, but for conversion. Every city taken was another victory for the church. Every temple destroyed was a nail in the coffin of the old, fractured Italy. Under Cesare's rule, Italy would be united not only by his command, but under the singular, watchful eye of his family's church. While Cesare Borgia fought his wars in the open, a different kind of conflict raged in the shadows of Rome. This was an ancient war fought for centuries between two secret societies, the Templar Order and the Assassin Brotherhood. Cesare, along with his father and the rest of his family, were the leaders of the Templar Order in Italy. The Templars believed that humanity was too flawed and chaotic to govern itself. They sought to bring peace and order to the world by controlling it from behind the scenes. They believed that true peace could only be achieved if free will was suppressed and mankind was guided by an enlightened, powerful elite. Cesare's quest to unite Italy was the ultimate expression of this Templar philosophy. Opposing them at every turn were the assassins. The Brotherhood of Assassins fought for the opposite ideal, freedom. They believed that humanity must be free to choose its own path, to live and think without being controlled by others. They saw the Templars' desire for control as a form of tyranny, a cage for the human spirit, no matter how gilded. For years, the assassins had worked from the shadows to undermine the Borgia's growing power. They sabotaged Cesare's war efforts, protected his targets, and worked to liberate the districts of Rome that had fallen under the grip of his captains. They were a constant thorn in his side, a hidden enemy he could not easily crush with his armies. The assassins in Rome had established their headquarters on Tiber Island, a natural fortress in the middle of the Tiber River. From this well-defended base, they coordinated their activities across the city. The island was a sanctuary for their members and a command center for their mentor, the master assassin who led their fight against the Borgia. Cesare knew that as long as this headquarters stood, the assassins would continue to threaten his plans. He could conquer all of Italy, but if the assassins remained, his control would never be absolute. The shadow war had to be brought into the light. He decided that the assassin's nest had to be destroyed. Cesare saw the assassins as the ultimate embodiment of the chaos he sought to eliminate. They represented defiance, individuality, and the unpredictable nature of human freedom, all things that stood in the way of his perfectly ordered world. Their clandestine methods were a direct challenge to his open display of power. He could not tolerate an enemy he could not see, one that could strike from anywhere. The conflict between Cesare's Templars and the assassins was more than just a battle for Rome. It was a battle for the soul of humanity itself. It was a clash between order and freedom, control and chaos. And Cesare was determined that order would prevail. The time for subtlety was over. Cesare Borgia decided to end the assassin threat once and for all. He gathered his finest troops and his most powerful siege weapons. His target was Tiber Island, the heart of the Assassin Brotherhood in Rome. He would not use stealth or subterfuge. He would use overwhelming force. The attack began under the cover of darkness. A storm of fire and iron unleashed upon the island fortress. Cannons, positioned on both banks of the Tiber River, roared to life. Their cannonballs smashed into the ancient buildings and fortifications that the assassins had used for their defense, turning their sanctuary into a death trap. The assassins fought back with desperate courage. They were skilled warriors, masters of stealth and guerrilla warfare. They used the rooftops and alleyways of the island to their advantage, picking off Borgia soldiers who tried to make a landing, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Cesare's army was a relentless machine. Wave after wave of soldiers stormed the bridges leading to the island, their losses meaning little to their commander. The battle raged for hours, the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded echoing across the water. The orange glow of fire reflected on the dark surface of the Tiber as the island burned. Cesare himself led the final assault. He was not a general who commanded from the rear. He was a warrior clad in black armor, fighting at the forefront of his men. He wanted to witness the destruction of his greatest enemies with his own eyes. He pushed his soldiers forward, his presence inspiring them to fight with even greater ferocity. The assassins' defenses crumbled under the relentless pressure. One by one, their strongholds fell. The battle moved from the shores of the island into its very streets, a brutal close-quarters struggle for survival. The assassins were fighting for their home and their ideals, but they were facing an unstoppable tide. By dawn, the battle was over. The Borgia flag flew over the smoking ruins of the assassin headquarters. The brotherhood in Rome was shattered, its members slain or scattered. Cesare stood amidst the devastation, his face grim but satisfied. He had ripped the heart out of the resistance. The shadow war was won. He had proven that no secret society, no matter how skilled or dedicated, could stand against the organized power of his Templar vision. The fall of Tiber Island was a brutal and decisive victory. It sent a clear message to any who might still dare to oppose him. Resistance was futile. The path to absolute control was now clear. In the fiery chaos of the fallen assassin headquarters, one final confrontation was destined to take place. Amidst the rubble and the bodies of his fallen comrades, the assassin mentor, Ezio Auditore da Firenze, emerged to face his nemesis. Ezio was a living legend within the Brotherhood, a master assassin who had fought the Templars his entire life. He had thwarted Cesare's plans time and again. He was the embodiment of the freedom that Cesare sought to crush. Now, the two men stood face to face, the leader of the assassins against the Grand Master of the Templar Order. This was not just a fight between two men, it was the final clash between their two warring ideologies. The duel was a whirlwind of motion and steel. Ezio was agile and swift, his hidden blades flashing as he moved with the grace of a predator. He was a master of a fluid, deadly fighting style, honed over decades of conflict. Cesare, in contrast, was a powerhouse of controlled aggression. Encased in his formidable black armor, he wielded his sword with brutal strength and precision. Every swing was meant to kill, every parry was a wall of solid steel. It was a classic battle of speed versus power, of freedom's unpredictable dance against order's unyielding force. The sparks from their clashing weapons lit up the smoke-filled air around them. For a time, they seemed evenly matched. Ezio's speed allowed him to land quick, stinging cuts, but he struggled to penetrate Cesare's heavy plate armor. Cesare's powerful blows could shatter stone, but Ezio's agility allowed him to evade the worst of the onslaught. They fought through the ruins of the fortress, their personal battle a microcosm of the larger war. Ezio fought with passion and grief for his lost brotherhood. Cesare fought with cold, calculating fury, determined to eradicate the last symbol of defiance to his rule. He saw Ezio not as a man but as a concept, chaos, that had to be put down permanently. But the long battle for the island had taken its toll on the assassin mentor. Ezio was weary, wounded, and emotionally shattered by the destruction of his home. Cesare, fueled by victory and unshakable self-belief, pressed his advantage. He used his raw strength to overpower the tiring assassin, trapping his blades and forcing him onto the defensive. With a final decisive move, Cesare disarmed his foe. He knocked Ezio to the ground, the assassin's body finally giving out. Cesare stood over him, sword pointed at his throat. The duel was over. Order had triumphed over chaos. Cesare had defeated his greatest enemy, and with him the hope of the assassin brotherhood. Leaving the broken body of his rival in the smoking ruins of Tiber Island, Cesare Borgia turned his back on the destruction. His victory was complete. The assassins were no more, and the last significant pocket of resistance in Rome had been extinguished. He gathered his victorious troops and began a slow, deliberate march back through the city. This was not a hurried return, it was a victory parade. He marched his army from the banks of the Tiber directly towards the Vatican, the spiritual and political heart of his power. The citizens of Rome, who had listened to the sounds of battle all night, now watched in silence as the conquering hero returned. Their silence was a mixture of fear, respect, and resignation. The destination of this procession was the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica. It was the grandest church in all of Christendom, a symbol of the Pope's power, and by extension, the Borgia's power. As Cesare and his elite guard walked up the steps, they were met by his father, Pope Alexander VI. The Pope, himself a Templar Grand Master, looked upon his son with immense pride. In his eyes, Cesare was not just a conquering general, he was the fulfillment of their order's ambitions. He was the strong arm that would forge the new world they had so long envisioned. Together, father and son represented the two pillars of Templar control, the spiritual and the temporal, the church and the state. Inside the vast basilica, before the high altar, Cesare Borgia knelt. It was a moment of profound symbolism. He had returned to the heart of the church not just as its protector, but as its master. He had used the papal armies to secure his own power and to advance the Templar cause. He had purged the city of his enemies and brought it to heel. In this sacred space, he offered his victory to his cause. It was a declaration that his conquests were not for personal glory alone, but were part of a divine, or at least a historical mission. The unification of Italy, the dream he had chased with such ruthless determination, was now within his grasp. From the steps of the basilica, Cesare addressed his captains and his soldiers. He spoke of their victory not as an end, but as a beginning. The fall of the assassins was the final obstacle removed. Now, the real work could begin. The campaigns to subdue the rest of Italy would continue, unopposed by the shadows that had plagued them for so long. Rome was secure. Their base was unshakable. With the blessing of the Pope and the strength of his army, Cesare was ready to complete his conquest. His return to St. Peter's was not just a celebration, it was a rededication to his ultimate purpose, the forging of a new Templar empire on the Italian peninsula. With all opposition in Rome crushed and the assassin brotherhood shattered, Cesare Borgia's power was absolute. The final years of his campaign were a storm of conquest that swept across the Italian peninsula. City-state after city-state, duchy after duchy, they all fell before his unstoppable army. Florence, with its proud republican traditions, was brought into the fold. Venice, the great maritime power, saw its mainland territories absorbed into Cesare's growing kingdom. The southern kingdom of Naples, long contested by France and Spain, was finally secured by an Italian ruler. The dream of unification, once a distant fantasy, had become a startling reality. Under Cesare's iron fist, Italy was transformed. The old patchwork of rival states was gone, replaced by a single, centralized kingdom ruled from Rome. The Borgia towers, once symbols of Roman oppression, were now replicated in cities across the country, a constant reminder of the new order. Cesare's captains became the governors of the new provinces, enforcing his laws with brutal efficiency. The endless wars that had plagued Italy for centuries ceased, replaced by the peace of total subjugation. It was an enforced peace, a peace without freedom, but it was peace nonetheless. The Templar philosophy had been made manifest. Mankind, guided by a firm hand, was finally at order. Catholicism, as defined by the Borgia papacy, was the sole religion of the new Italian kingdom. The campaign of cultural and spiritual purification that began in Rome was extended across the entire nation. All other faiths were driven underground or extinguished completely. The church and state were one, a single entity designed to control every aspect of human life, from how a person prayed to how they conducted their business. The Templars had achieved their goal. They had created a society of perfect order, stability, and control, a society where the chaotic variable of human free will was carefully managed and suppressed for the greater good. And so, a new Roman Empire was born, not of emperors and legions, but of a captain general and his Templar vision. Cesare Borgia, the ruthless son of a pope, had succeeded where so many others had failed. He had taken a fractured, chaotic land and forged it into a single, powerful nation under his absolute control. History would remember him as a tyrant, a conqueror, and a man of terrifying ambition. But in the world he created, he was the savior, the unifier, the man who brought order to chaos. Italy was united, the Templars reigned supreme, and the future of the nation, for better or for worse, was now firmly in his hands.